Mildred Thompson had made the encampment her home for almost a year now, a stark contrast to the life she once knew. Nestled in the shadows of the vibrant city of Seattle, she found herself living in a makeshift tent, surrounded by discarded memories of a life that felt increasingly distant. Once she was a thriving mother and a proud grandmother, but after the sudden loss of her daughter, the world had crumbled around her, leaving her adrift in a sea of grief and isolation. Every morning, at precisely 7 a.m., Mildred would shuffle to the edge of the encampment, her weathered hands wrapped around a chipped mug. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee would waft through the air, a small comfort against the chill of the morning. She would watch the cars whiz by, each one a potential connection to the life she had lost. Among them was her son, Tom, an executive at Amazon who would drive past on his way to work. Mildred had her routine down to a science. Each day she would brew a cup of coffee and set it aside, hoping that today would be the day he would look her way. The bagel was a staple too, a simple gesture of care she wanted to share with him, a reminder of the breakfasts they used to have together when life was brighter. Yet day after day, Tom would pass without acknowledgement, his eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding the very existence of the woman who had once loved him fiercely. She would stand there, heart pounding, as the familiar silhouette of his car approached. Her breath would catch in her throat, and she would summon all her courage to raise her hand in greeting. But as always, Tom would speed past, leaving her with a cloud of disappointment. Still, hope was a stubborn thing, and Mildred clung to it like a lifeline. Perhaps tomorrow would be different. Perhaps he would finally see her. One fateful morning, everything changed. The sky was a dull gray, and the rain had begun to fall, a typical Seattle day. Mildred set out to cross the freeway, determined to reach the coffee stand on the other side. She had always tried to be cautious, but today the traffic was heavier than usual, and the rain made the roads slick. As she stepped onto the crosswalk, the light turned green and she hurried across, her heart racing with anticipation. But fate had other plans. Just as she reached the halfway point, a honking car swerved unexpectedly, forcing her to stumble back onto the curb. In that split second, she caught a glimpse of Tom's car, sleek and shiny, gliding past. He was engrossed in his phone, oblivious to the world around him, and for the first time she felt a swell of anger mixed with despair. Why couldn't he see her? Why couldn't he just once acknowledge her existence? Mildred stood frozen on the side of the road, watching as his car disappeared into the distance. She felt the rain mix with her tears, and for a moment the weight of her loneliness became unbearable. The world around her blurred. Mildred's days blurred into a routine filled with anticipation and reflection. Each morning brought with it the hope that today would be the day she would finally connect with Tom or hear from Sarah. The encampment had become a backdrop for her longing, a place where the laughter of children and the sounds of the city felt unbearably distant. As she navigated her morning rituals, she often found herself in deep conversations with Jerry. He had become a confidant, someone who understood the weight of loss and the struggle to find one's place in a world that seemed to move on without them. They would sit on a weathered bench, sharing stories of their pasts, and Mildred found solace in the bond they were forming. One day, as they shared a cup of coffee, Jerry spoke about his own family. "You know, I had a brother once. He was everything to me," he began, his eyes clouding with distant memories. "But life happened and we lost touch. I've spent years trying to find him again." Mildred listened, feeling a kinship with his pain. "It's hard to reach out when so much has happened," she said softly. "But sometimes it's the only way to heal." As the weeks turned into months, Mildred continued her quest to connect with her children. She often found herself writing letters, pouring her heart into words she hoped would bridge the gap between them. She would leave them tucked under the windshield wipers of Tom's car, praying that one day he would read them. In her letters, she recounted cherished memories, the time they went camping in the Cascades, roasting marshmallows by the fire, or the holiday dinners filled with laughter and warmth. She wrote about her daughter's artwork that once filled their home with color and joy. Then one morning, as she stood at her usual spot, she noticed something different. Tom's car was parked further down the street, and for the first time he was not in a hurry. He was sitting inside, scrolling through his phone, seemingly lost in thought. Her heart raced as she made a decision. This might be her chance. Mildred took a deep breath and approached the car, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the passenger side and gently tapped on the window. Tom looked up, startled. For a moment, their eyes locked, and a whirlwind of emotions washed over her: fear, love, sadness, and hope. "Mom," he stammered, his expression a mix of disbelief and confusion. "Tom," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I've been waiting for you. Can we talk?" He hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an escape. But something in her gaze held him there, rooted to the spot. Slowly, he rolled down the window. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone cautious. "I just want to see you," she replied, her voice steadying. "I miss you," Tom sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's complicated, Mum. I don't know what to say." See. The morning sun peeked through the clouds, casting a golden hue over the encampment. Mildred Thompson had never been more excited. Her heart raced as she tidied up the little shed she called home, preparing for a visit that felt like a dream. Tom was coming to see her. Weeks had passed since their last encounter, a breakthrough that had opened the doors of communication between them. The letters she had written and their conversations had begun to heal long-festering wounds. Now as she waited, her thoughts danced with anticipation. What would she say? What could she share? There was so much she wanted to tell him. Finally, she heard the familiar sound of tires crunching on gravel. She rushed to the entrance of her little shed, her heart pounding. As Tom stepped out of his car, the sunlight caught his features. His eyes, still filled with uncertainty, now held a glimmer of hope. He looked around, taking in the encampment that had become her world. "Mom," he called, his voice tentative. "Mildred," she exclaimed, rushing towards him, her arms outstretched. They embraced tightly, and in that moment the barriers between them felt like they were dissolving. "I'm so glad you're here. I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too," Tom replied, pulling back to look at her. "I've been thinking about everything, about us. I really want to understand." He had expected a bare, cramped area, but what he found was a sanctuary. Brightly colored paintings adorned the walls, each telling a story of love, loss, and resilience. Shelves held books filled with stories, and handmade crafts filled every corner. "Wow, Mom, this is incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I didn't know you had created all this." "It's my little world," Mildred replied, beaming with pride. "When I lost Mary, I didn't know how to cope. So I started painting and writing stories. It became my way of keeping her memory alive." Tom's gaze shifted to a small corner of the shed, where a glowing candle stood atop a large rock. The candle flickered gently, casting a warm light across the room. "What's that?" Mildred took a deep breath, her heart aching with vulnerability. "That's where your sister died, Tom. Right there in that spot." She stepped closer to the rock and placed her hand on it, tears welling in her eyes. "Every night I hold her in my heart and dream with her. I've kept that candle burning as a symbol of her light." Tom felt a lump form in his throat. He took a step closer, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "I didn't know. I didn't realize how much you were hurting. I didn't want to burden you with my pain," Mildred confessed, her voice trembling. Mildred's days blurred into a routine filled with anticipation and reflection. Each morning brought with it the hope that today would be the day she would finally connect with Tom or hear from Sarah. The encampment had become a backdrop for her longing, a place where the laughter of children and the sounds of the city felt unbearably distant. As she navigated her morning rituals, she often found herself in deep conversations with Jerry. He had become a confidant, someone who understood the weight of loss and the struggle to find one's place in a world that seemed to move on without them. They would sit on a weathered bench, sharing stories of their pasts, and Mildred found solace in the bond they were forming. One day, as they shared a cup of coffee, Jerry spoke about his own family. "You know, I had a brother once. He was everything to me," he began.